Caravan. Projected to a highly sophisticated form of propaganda.
It's just what you need and not what you don't.
Yes, just what you need and not what you don't. Welcome to another edition.
Good morning.
Tony Caravan with you for this Monday morning. It's 6:15 on Eastern Standard Time in the Mid-Atlantic States on March 29th. And today's show has a graphic of von Braun's vision of a space station that never came to be, that I guess was an inspiration for either he was inspired by Clark or Clark/Kubrick 2001 was inspired by his image. But whichever case may be, it's pretty crazy. It never came to be. As the rocket goes off and disappears into the atmosphere for those listening on a podcast only.
Here's what's happening.
Well, what's happening is it's another week. This is the last week of March. March is going out like a lion. Unlike most the childhood rhyme, March comes in like a lion and out like a lamb. It's about the, 5th year running that we've had these cold springs. For those of us who are farmers, so to speak, backyard farmers, it's like armchair warriors, backyard farmers who monitor the temperature each and every day. I've got a printout here of mine, and as I've got scribblings and highlights on various portions of it, as you can see. But in the beginning of April, isn't looking too good. The overnights are all pretty much below the freezing mark Fahrenheit wise. So there's nothing you could do about it. Just cover those crops and hope for the best. Trying to keep the glare down today a little bit, and I'm drinking what's called Dr. Thunder in my morning show mug. For those of you new to the show, I always begin the show with a little bit of personal nonsense just to catch you up on what's going on, and then we get into it. In the description of the show, I just say it's a further examination of the Breakaway Civilizations. And the title is We Live in Different Worlds. And to jump right into it, those who watched yesterday's show, I watched yesterday's show. There were only two, I think there were two little things, points of correction that needed to be made. One was I inadvertently referred to, I should have said Dionne Warwick instead of Roberta Flack when I was referring to a particular song. Someone who may have caught that, that was that. And there was something else that'll probably come to me that was a very minor, just slip of the tongue. When you're talking for 2 hours and it's early in the morning, these things happen. There's nothing you can do about it. I don't profess to be some sort of great orator. I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm not monetized. I don't make a living at doing this thing. I'm just doing this to share some of my life experiences and insights into things that may or may not be of help to you and yours. If it is, watch. If it isn't, this is like TV. Just flip the channel. Go to somewhere else. There's got to be I don't know how many hundreds of millions of people doing various things. There's a road rally going on outside, which happens quite often. So, what do I mean by, first of all, let's define breakaway civilization. Those who've heard me talk before about these sort of things know that I'm semi referring to, there's a couple of ways of viewing this, but one way is looking at, say, someone in the Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates league, okay, of billionaires who have have amassed such a fortune that they there's no they're just living in a completely different world, so to speak, than even someone with a very good job. Another way of looking at it would be to take a look at this picture here and say that people living in many of these high-rise skyscrapers, some apartment buildings, some just office buildings, that comparing those to people that live in the so-called flyover states, in rural areas and what have you, that this is a breakaway civilization. Um, and then likewise, even people living in just a city, uh, any city like I am, which is a top one, what we call maybe a top 100 market, a former industrial city that steadily lost its population over the years, but still has a structure, still is incorporated as a city. Um, that compared to someone living in, say, the frozen, tundra lands of North America, or the rainforest in South America, certain places in Southeast Asia, uh, remote areas in the African continent, even the Middle East these days, in areas that have been war torn for decades, that we would be considered, even someone living in just a city, a borough, a township with concrete roads, and decent buildings and apartment buildings and banks and office buildings and places like that, would be breakaway civilization. And you may or may not be able to come up with a couple other, various degrees of separation of people. And and the lifestyles within these areas are quite different. That everything, it's not just technology, it's not just architecture, it's not just the infrastructure, but it's the idea of growing up, being raised, educated, working, living in those various environments, that it's a I guess, to use the word, it's a holistic uh, breakaway civilization. Um, but I'm not here to talk about the differences between people living in the rainforest, such as those, rumored tribes that every time they even, you know, so-called modern man gets even close to where they are, they've avoided all contact whatsoever. And every time modern man even gets close, they just move deeper and deeper uh, into the rainforest. And or certain tribes that have refused, to adapt to any sort of so-called Western civilization, or colonial, or missionaries, um, the things that they've tried to bring to their various uh, tribes, communities, whatever. Not really talking about that. That's been going on for a long time. you know, for many, many, for you could say for millennia. There have always been those that have avoided any kind of civilization and just weren't interested in it. I mean, you could look at, say, the height of even Greece, Rome, the dynastic period in Egypt, China's rise, uh, even the Mayans, for that matter, Inca, various civilizations that have come and gone, the rise and fall of empires that during the height of those civilizations, that there were always people that were not participating in that lifestyle, taking advantage of that technology, whatever it may have been. But that's something that's something for the history books. That's something we all should know or know. Now I'm talking about today, and the idea that we've we've come to this point where civilization has reached certain heights of advanced technologies. Now that's not to say that in previous uh, epochs, perhaps, that there haven't been civilizations that even were more advanced than us. I know that's hard for some people to accept, and it enters into the woo-woo area in the minds of certain people, certain individuals. But as a thought experiment, or just as something, it just well, even just as simply as thinking in terms of science fiction or something. I mean, because you have to remember, if you look at the title card again with von Braun in front of the model of the space station that never came to be, the round circular space station, uh, this kind of talk is right in line with any sort of dreamer, visionary, someone who just looked at the way things were, the technologies were developing, and came up with ideas that what what could be, things to come. And many of those things did actually come to fruition, but others were just like flying cars, never did. And like I say, I don't think ever will. It's not a practical concept, really. I mean, we have some people have created some flying cars, more or less, kind of combo cars. It's a car that you can drive and then the wings come out and stuff, things of that nature. But the concept of a flying car that's almost like an anti-gravity device, and all these cars crisscrossing all over in the sky, it's just not really practical. From anyone who's ever commuted to work, lived in a major city, and tried to get into New York City, or the LA freeways during rush hour, and any other city, Philadelphia, it doesn't matter, Atlanta, Dallas, whatever. Anyone who's ever spent time doing that knows that that kind of traffic in the sky is a recipe for a disaster. It's bad enough we already have something like 30 to 50,000 car accidents with people having four wheels on the ground, let alone just madness in the skies. But for the most part, a lot of science fiction has come true. And, those ideas I talked before the other day, Isaac Asimov's vision of the communication satellite basically was the impetus for us for the actual thing. But in when you've reached I'm talking about right now, and so when you have a separation of people, uh, cities, portions of cities, and resources, financial resources primarily, which lead to the technological separation of people. That would be considered a breakaway civilization, because there's no way that the average individual can attain $60 million in today's world. I mean, in one day, in the old days, someone could become a millionaire having a dream of a lottery, or strike it rich some way or so through some extreme success. But the way the system is, the game is rigged, so to speak, the game of life right now, that those days are over. I mean, there may be a fluke. Like I say, there are no, you cannot have a say with absolute certainty anything, that, perhaps someone can create some sort of widget somewhere and manage to hold on, patent it, and excuse me, there's a cat down here, down the bottom, and manage to go through the process properly without it being, co-opted, stolen, or someone with more lawyers than that individual somehow taking control of the situation, stealing it in effect, like has happened and does happen many times with some companies right now that are very big, were brought, uh, to the level of wealth through lawsuits and through patent, uh, you know, you know, games. But those would be a very rare exception, and with each passing year, it seems less and less likely something like that's going to happen. So, with that as a preface, I didn't want to, the idea here is not to just talk about technological breakaway civilizations. And there are those dreamers like the Elon Musks who see, almost like a breakaway civilization, perhaps like with his Mars concept, like setting up a Mars base and a separate uh, civilization on the planet Mars. I don't believe that's practical. I don't believe that's going to necessarily happen. And I kind of think that it would be a fool's errand and could end up in really, tragedy. Likewise, with a moon base and things of that nature. The reason that we haven't seen von Braun and Asimov / Kubrick's 2001 vision, come to fruition over the past 60 years is mainly because of practicality. It's not really a matter of finance. Okay. There's always been the idea and the knowledge that there would be revenue streams available from mining asteroids, the moon itself, and of course, even the planet Mars. So there's a financial incentive there to do it. There's a research scientific incentive there, and if you think about the endowments at universities and some of the finest science-based universities around the world, that they would have an interest in research bases, one would think, uh, on the moon or on Mars. And then again, and then the Elon Musks and the like Virgin Atlantic, the idea of those who've amassed fortunes, who like to just play with play with that money, because there comes a point where you could just buy so many cars, so many houses, do so many things, even give so much to foundations or what have you, and there's still billions sitting there. And so that becomes the hobby of the multi-billionaire is what do I do? you know some people don't really have that motivation. Some people just are involved in sport, the golfer, the those who travel the world, the jet setters. They've been around since, forever. So there are many, this is all under the umbrella of the breakaway civilization. So whether you're a jet, the jet set, or I heard some kind of strange noise. I've got headphones on, so sometimes things passing through the microphone appear to be something other than they are. But whether you were a jet setter in the 50s and 60s, most of the 60s culture, the lounge culture. I used to do a lounge show in the 90s. I had the longest running lounge radio show on the internet, actually, according to published reports in various magazines back then. But whether you were one of those jet set lounge type of individuals and were caught up in that culture, or the international playboy, so to speak, which I guess is not politically correct today to say that, or just someone who was a game player. Right? A friend of mine used to. I published, I've done so many things over my life, but there's various projects apart from being involved in media and advertising and entertainment. I was also involved in publishing my entire life. And I had a friend once. I was doing something. I was putting out a calendar of some kind. It was a website, because I experimented in the 90s. I was putting websites out before most people even were online or had an email account. You've got mail. While they were before they were even sending out the AOL CDs, a lot of us already had websites. And I say a lot, I mean the pioneers, so to speak. And at one point, I had a website. It was more of a page, in a website that was kind of like a magazine-ish idea. In other words, I was taking my print background, and many people in the early days, that's how the internet was. It's not, it's changed drastically from that. But in at that point, the conventions of print publishing were finding themselves into HTML page structure, so that websites would have, the cover, so to speak, and then, the various, and that's how you ended up, and you still have it. I mean, you have that about, our services, it's still like a contents, and you go through instead of something, radically different. And I guess you could say we were a breakaway civilization. Excuse me. Usually get the caffeine in there early as possible. It helps. So we were kind of a breakaway civilization, virtual civilization on the internet in the 90s. But to get back to this story, I had a page that was a calendar. And the idea was that since I was on the internet, it was the idea of having a calendar that dealt with international events. In other words, what's going on today, not in, say, here in the mid-Atlantic states, the former United States, as I call it, but what's happening everywhere else. And it was a pretty interesting thing. And myself and a business partner of mine, we kept that up for, I don't know, for maybe a year or two, as part, it was like part of the page. I used to monitor different things, because the internet, it's changed. Access to various data has changed. In other words, there's because of all the hackers over the years that there have been multiple firewalls put up even on taxpayers, so-called taxpayer government sites that were just providing information. So in other words, to make that to just be obviously clear with that, say I wanted to put on a website a NOAA weather map, okay? Well, you would go to NOAA, and you could probably still do this in some instances. And I know some people are doing it with some of the NASA stuff, like the solar, like the sun. Some of our, we have these cameras, these satellites out there that are basically fixated on the sun at any given time. Look at this ridiculous, behind it. Imagine this view minus these idiotic things, bird killers. I know that upsets some people, but the price of energy's gone up. Half these things aren't even spinning. Many of them will just break. No one will repair. No one wants to claim ownership to them because they've been like bought and sold through Wall Street. They were produced with grant money, tax rebates, tax incentives, and then traded on the open market, and then they sit there. And then the only way to repair them would be using carbon-based fossil fuels, because while my thumb is pointing at this thing, these are high as multi-story buildings, so you would require heavy equipment and cranes, to pull them apart, to raise them or lower them and things like that. Yeah, you could go inside and a guy can climb up, perhaps, and put a grease gun in there to do something. But yeah, anyway, I don't want to lose my train of thought, but whenever I see them, I get it. That whoever came up with that idea was to ruin oceans, mountain views, and landscapes, and to kill birds, and end up not lowering people's rates or having any noticeable real increase, beneficial increase in so-called clean energy. It was just a scam. Okay. Now, where were we? It's a problem when you get into these things, and I have an area where I want to go. So I was publishing a website, and websites had to do with were structured like magazines, and I was talking about like stereo A, stereo B satellites that are constantly focused on the sun, our star. And the idea is that because the sun is the most important thing to us, it's why the early, people were sun worshipers, or so they say. I mean, without the sun, we cannot survive. It's the giver of life. From a human being standpoint, vitamin D, plants need it to grow. It warms our planet, right? Our climate is controlled by the sun. There it is. And it's beautiful, and it probably appears to be beautiful to us, a sunrise or a sunset. The reason that it's a natural sense that it is beauty is because it's that life-giving force, in our lives. Well, in any event, I had at one point, I had this particular series of pages that would be considered together almost as an online magazine. All right. And I've done this multiple times in different ways with different names, so it doesn't really matter. And I no longer really do that thing anymore. I don't, like I said, I'm not monetized on these videos, and I don't really, I'm basically retired when it comes from that. So I'm just sharing ideas and anecdotes about things. Well, anyway, so on there, I had things like I would have a link to a link embedded link. And to embed something means it appears on your page, even though it originated somewhere else. It's like when people embed a video on their website, but it's actually on YouTube. Okay. So I would have an embedded NOAA weather map, say, on my weather page. And so I would have original content, but I would also have the actual thing. So you didn't have to go to the NOAA site and hunt down a particular page. Excuse me. YouTube, I'm just checking to make sure YouTube got the right title up, and it did. It pops up on its own. And so I was able to, it was a magazine, just no different than what is done by a print magazine, or I guess some people may or may not be doing these sorts of things today. And there was another page where I was studying the planet. And so I had everything from, embedded pictures of, the sun, in real time that were available. And I also had, live earthquakes and volcano, coverage of volcanoes. And there are many webcams out there, and the webcam links used to be how I started this is before people were into all these I use the word nefarious is overused, I know, on my show, but I'm going to say it. Before there were all these nefarious actors, out there who were just basically hacking into websites and just causing disruption. It was fairly easy to grab information from these sites, and it was taxpayer money anyway. So the idea was there was no question whether or not we had a right to that information. And those of us who did it on the up and up, for the sake of sharing knowledge and linking back, of course, to the source so people could further dig deeper if that was their area of interest. It was fine, again, until these bad actors decided to come in and kind of ruin it for everybody. But this is before that time. This is in the early days. And so, I used to have a page that was strictly that. You could see, you just go to this one page, and here was this the current state of the sun. You could see if there were any solar sunspots, solar flares, or anything like that. What was happening? Webcams from various volcanoes in Hawaii and other areas, active volcanoes, where any earthquakes over 6.0, say, for example, where they occurred, buoys that were showing, if there were tsunamis or, things of that nature, temperature reports from various stations, and general webcams, sometimes random webcams from places, so that you can see what it actually looked like. See, it's not enough to say, for me to hold up a piece of paper like this with, that says 55 degrees and showers on Wednesday, the 31st. What was nice about that time was that in fact, there used to be apps like that, and they don't even really have that stuff. On my older computer, they still work, but some of the newer computers, they don't even really have the apps for that. Though, someone could contradict me now and say, hey, try this or whatever. But I'm telling you, if you go back 20 years, it was a lot better, because you could actually put in the station name. Like, that's how I know the weather stations were based at airports and various places when I talk about climate. Right. And the average person with some kind of sign saying, hey, we must, do this, do that, this treaty or whatever. And I'm like, you don't even know where weather, what the real climate is, what the real weather is. You're parroting something that someone else that you saw heard someone speak on TV who got it from another party that said something or whatever, and blah, blah, blah. And that was the reason why I did the site the way I did it. Is, in other words, what you're seeing here, this would be the webcam, and I would say, it snowed last night. All right. And here's what it looks like right now. Or here's the weather in New York City, because you could tap into a webcam, right? Because it was it had a URL. And I was really disappointed over the years that I thought that was the future of the internet. I really did. And and even like YouTube, that there would be this idea, and there are webcams you could see, like right now I believe you can go and see in live the volcano erupting in Iceland, okay, right now on YouTube. Excuse me. And when we had when Hawaii was going crazy, was it last year or the year before? There were multiple cameras that were keeping track of the lava flows and things of that nature. But what I'm saying is and I'll get to the point of what I was Breakaway Civilization, why this all makes sense. This is just a Tony Caravan way of doing it, a roundabout way of sharing a little bit of history with the topic. I always envisioned that, and was disappointed in, that there was never this that webcams from around the world, so to speak, never really became a big deal. Like even with cable TV, that I thought, even for its own survival, like wouldn't it be great if they would have a channel that would flip from webcams around the world, and these various weather channels, so to speak, that just started putting on programs and reruns of programs on, instead of getting into that actual stuff. Now, that's not to say that they don't do that. They do. I'm not saying you can't turn on some station and even some network and they'll show you a webcam, during a storm, that they'll tap into a highway somewhere and show you this. Yeah, they do that. They still do it. And, there's still, you could find on YouTube various, cameras from different places. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the idea, and imagine the concept of, if it was really widespread, that you could be flipping around, like in this image here, from webcams, channels just devoted to that. So people could really see the world, right? That would be very, very, very educational, very interesting, because, and imagine, especially during this new era of, who knows, is it going to be eternal lockdowns? The idea that if you're stuck in a cubicle, like, hundreds of millions of people are, in Western civilization, or the former Western civilization, as I call that too, that what it would be like to try to expand your horizon, so to speak. Well, anyway, on this site that I just rather lengthily described, I had this calendar, and the calendar was things happening around the world. And a friend had said to me one time, I showed it to, who was a world traveler, explorer type individual, said, wouldn't it be great to have a publication or a thing like that had all the key things that were going at any given time, happening worldwide, and this was like from a jet setter's perspective. And his idea was that, there are certain things. So it would be like, so here's the, where you want to be if you're a jet setter. Okay. So you want to be at the Cannes Film Festival, right? You might want to do Le Mans, right? You might want to be at, you obviously would be at in New Orleans for Mardi Gras, right? You want to be in Rio, you know. Um, there are various things that are happening, the Olympics, you know, you would want to be there. And so at any given time, I mean, before this lockdown and this crazy era we live in, which is now what we're coming into the second year of this thing. But the idea was that, I'm talking about breakaway civilizations and the individuals, who populate that breakaway civilization, because a breakaway civilization, in effect, could be a civilization that doesn't necessarily have a geographical location, right? That's an interesting concept. And so that was an interesting thought, and it started to include all that stuff in my calendar, and I think like I said, I think I did that for about a year or so. And so if you were the type of person, there was always some place that that you would want to be. And the average person is, it might be aware of the Cannes Film Festival, or is aware of Mardi Gras and things of that nature, because they're very public events. But there's all these other kind of elite events. I mean, it would be, for example, to be at Davos, at that time. And even if you weren't a major player at Davos, say, the idea is, they have parties and there's events and stuff that go on when you get all these people together. And so the idea is, if you could get into one of those parties. And that's the breakaway civilization, the Davos set. The World Economic Forum, that, these people that I criticize when I talk about the Great Reset and stuff of that nature, that's a breakaway, that's a breakaway civilization. And technology, is also a big part of that. People who have technology that the average person can't afford. And when I say the average person, at one time, the Fortune 500 was just a bunch of millionaires, multimillionaires. But, now it's billionaires. And so, and you have corporations approaching $1 trillion, worth of $1 trillion. So those are breakaway numbers, And so the average person who thinks they're living well, making 6 figures, is just not in the same league as a billionaire, or even someone making 100 million, as opposed to somebody who makes $1.2 million a year. They're not in the same league as somebody who makes 10 times that, you see. It's a difference of, I remember when I was the first time when I was younger, and I remember I was doing some work for some individual, because I've always been around successful people. It's just the way it is. I was drawn to that world. And I remember one time I was helping this guy who was he had some story. He had a business, but he had a story he wrote. And he wanted somebody to publish, he wanted to self-publish it. He just wanted to print the book. And I don't know how many of them he wanted, but I guess it wasn't like he wanted to sell them. I guess he just wanted to print so many of them and give them away, or to family, friends, and have it. And somehow, I got involved in that thing, and I was helping him, put that, helping him put it together. And I remember, I'm talking about being young, I don't think I was even 20. I was barely 20, maybe 19 or something around that time, because I started early doing these things. And I remember the guy saying, here, go get yourself some lunch. We were done. We had a morning meeting. He goes, I got some things to do. I was going to take you to lunch, but I can't. Here, go get yourself some lunch. He opens his wallet and gives me $100 bill. And at the time, that was like $100 lunch. you know. But and it wasn't long after, that I realized, well, the man was a multimillionaire. So $100 lunch for someone who's a multimillionaire is some is like the average person spending 10 or $20 or less on a lunch. In fact, $100 isn't even a big lunch. Breakaway civilization, kind of thing. But how does that play into anything that really, is worth talking about, worth thinking about? Well, another aspect of a breakaway civilization is breaking away. I put in the description, we live in different worlds. And I've talked about on multiple occasions that I canceled my television service. So I don't, I basically don't watch commercial TV. I point up there because I used to have this TV here that we're going down some riverbed, mounted on the ceiling, on the wall above my, which you can't see, but my computer set up here. So I could be operating, my, control center here, but up there on the wall was also TV. So I could be monitoring something live up there. When I was caught up in that whole world of information. I no longer do that because I found out that world of information to be a bunch of used car salesmen. And that's a whole nother story. But, when you think having dropped, and what I was using at the time was DirecTV. Okay. But I mean, whether you have Comcast or, various services available, a lot of people now get their TV through things like a Roku box. YouTube has TV where they offer these channels. The networks are very desperate for viewership because the ratings are dropping like just so much. There's very few. And the thing about understanding the structure of media today is that, they're not, it's not as if there are hundreds and hundreds of channels. There are like groups that have these subgroups of channels because their viewership has dropped so much that they had to gobble up, various cable channels in order to meet their numbers, their viewership numbers, so that it could sell advertising packages that include these. In the old days, and they probably still do it, but when I was doing it, which I consider the old days of radio, when I used to manage radio, sell radio, and be on the radio, I've worn every hat in radio as you can imagine. You would sell a spot, a commercial, an ad. And, if it was it was a specific show, that would be prime time. They used to call in radio drive time when people were in their cars. That was prime time. And then you would get with that a package. And that package could be like what they called ROS, run of station, right? So, and so you would get, if you paid X amount of dollars to advertise on a particular radio or television station, you might get so many spots or one spot on their big morning show or two spots in their drive time or whatever. But then they would throw in, say, 25 spots run of the station, meaning they could be, in the middle of the afternoon, later at night, overnight, whatever. And that's how they packaged a package deal. and as stations that had multiple stations, AM FM combos they used to call them, and then there were groups, people that as they started to buy individual uh, broadcast corporations or groups would buy, gobble up a series of stations. And so you might get a particular advertisement, your spot on multiple stations. Uh, and the ones with the lower ratings were the ones that would be like kind of thrown into the package. And so you might buy a network today and get along with it some of these various cable channels. And the cable channels I'm talking about. I'm talking about the household name cable channels. But the thing to remember is that over time, these stations have lost viewers because people have spend too much time, using. I always bring up my old, the old iPhone. There's too much time spent with this device, so people aren't watching, the History Channel, DIY, HGTV, Discovery, all those Animal Planet, and all those things in the numbers they were, say, in like the late 90s, for example, or early 2000s. Once the smartphone became the center of life existence, and with the onset of apps and then social media, the amount of time spent on watching television decreased greatly. And so these networks, these corporations, did all they could to gobble up as many other stations as they could to try to maintain enough of a viewership that they could sell enough, get enough advertising revenue to at least maintain their existence, really. Okay. And of course, they've branched out, and then they've applied pressure on YouTube. And that's why you've seen the disappearance of a lot of channels. That's why even this is a station. I mean, I call this is Rock Flux, was a channel I set up here in the beginning days. But why some stations are throttled or not pushed to the top. And so there's financial pressures by networks and other corporate entities to not allow an individual to gain and build an audience the way you could have built an audience before. And that's just a fact now. That's not to say that things don't go viral. Hopefully I just accidentally hit a button and a pop screen came up showing some details about the broadcast. Hopefully you didn't get a blank there. But yeah, things go viral. And there are YouTubers that get hundreds of thousands, and of course even a million viewers, so to speak. But that it's just not, it's the same with websites. It's a totally different world than it was. And so how does, as I say, the concept of we live in different worlds and breakaway civilizations, encompasses all sorts of varying degrees, of what you would consider a civilization or a society or or a people or the way people live, which is pretty much everything I said it's all describing the same thing. In any event, so I, having left TV in the sense of I don't watch it anymore, I no longer, there are those that still watch, and it's not the numbers aren't big. Like a lot of the cable channels that are the most talked about, and if you like flip around on YouTube and you see these little things, I used to tweet about this when I was caught up in. I no longer deal with politics. To me, all right. I mean, it's just something that I don't do. Anyway, I am going to end this stream and begin it very shortly. Okay, so stay tuned for part 2. Be right back.